To philosophize is to learn how to die. Montaigne. Medieval Europe did not merely fear death, it lived with it. It painted it, prayed to escape it, laughed at it, danced with it, and carried its image everywhere. To us, death is hidden, delayed, softened by distance. To them, it was part of the air. A child could die from a fever, a harvest could fail, a winter could turn cruel, a village could lose half its people to plague, and the rest would simply keep going, because there was no other choice. In that world, death was not a distant idea, it was a neighbor. The Black Death made this fear impossible to ignore. Streets emptied, bells rang too often. Priests buried the dead until there was no one left to bury them. And when people tried to understand what was happening, they reached for religion, for symbols, for art. They filled churches with skulls and candles, painted skeletons into murals, and reminded themselves over and over, "Remember, you must die." That phrase, memento mori, was not decoration, it was survival. The medieval mind did not see death as a stranger. It saw death as the final truth behind everything. Kings died, beggars died, bishops died, children died. The Danse Macabre captured that idea with brutal clarity. Death leading everyone in the same procession, from the strongest ruler to the humblest peasant. In the end, status meant nothing. Flesh returned to dust the same way for all. Marcus Aurelius had already written, centuries earlier, that death smiles at us all. Seneca taught that fortune is fragile and that nothing human lasts. Medieval Europe took those truths and made them visible. It did not hide mortality behind comfort. It placed mortality on the walls. That is why the age feels so haunted. Not because people were morbid for no reason, but because they understood something modern life often forgets. The world is temporary. The body is temporary. Even the greatest kingdom is temporary. Montaigne wrote that to philosophize is to learn how to die. Medieval Europe never needed to be told that. It lived that lesson every day. In plague years, in famine years, in years of war and ruin, human beings were forced to confront the one certainty they all shared. And perhaps that is why so much medieval art feels so severe, so solemn, so strange. It was not merely art, it was a meditation. Boccaccio's Decameron was born from this world, from the shadow of the Black Death, when fear and storytelling existed side by side. Pascal would later describe the human urge to distract ourselves from silence, from our own fragility. But medieval people had little ability to look away. Death stood in the marketplace, it stood in the graveyard, it stood in the church, it stood beside the bed. Even the great wars and crusades of the age fed this mindset. Life could be lost for faith, for kings, for land, for rumor, for a failed season, for a cough, for a wound that never healed. The medieval world was a world where fate could change in a single hour, and no man knew whether the bell was ringing for someone else or for him. Schopenhauer believed human existence swings between suffering and illusion. Medieval Europe, in its own way, seemed to agree. People endured by turning suffering into ritual and ritual into meaning. If death could not be avoided, then it had to be understood. If it could not be conquered, then it had to be faced. So they painted it as a skeleton. They carved it into tombs. They whispered prayers beside it. They danced with it in their imagination until it became familiar. And maybe that is the most unsettling thing of all. Not that medieval Europe was obsessed with death, but that it may have been more honest about death than we are, because they knew what we still try to forget, that every life is borrowed, every day is temporary, and every world eventually becomes a memory. And when the medieval world looked into the darkness, it did not turn away. It called it by name.